Is this Dave?
It's Dave. How you doing, brother?
I'm doing okay, man. How are you?
I'm just trying to get some good levels. Can you hear me okay? Do I need to go up, down, anything like that?
I can hear you well.
All
Yeah.
right. Now I got you. Now I got you good there. Great, Peter. Let me just stick a quick introduction on it. I'm running this the week of.
Okay, great.
All right. Hang,
Great.
hang tight one sec. It's HBR, All Things Considered, and I'm Dave Lawrence. Today we are welcoming back our friend Peter Rowan, who is playing Friday at the Doris Duke Theater, Honolulu Museum of Art, Saturday over at the MAC. Peter, a Grammy award-winning musician known for his bluegrass songs, his singing, his guitar playing, mandolin, of course, that one gigantic song, which we'll hear about as well. And he joins us right now. Hey, Peter, welcome back. Good to have you on the show.
But nice to be here, man. Thanks, Dave.
You are quite welcome. And for folks who are getting excited for these shows that are coming up and coming up soon, what's in store? If you can, paint a little picture, who you're bringing, and what kind of flavors we can expect at this magical couple of events.
Well, I've been hanging out over that way and playing music with a couple of really great musicians over there, and I just decided to bite the bullet and try and make a record that reflected kind of the bluegrass roots and the Hawaiian roots of bluegrass, um, which are considerable in that the Hawaiian string bands toured on the mainland for years and years and formed the basis for a lot of the string band projects that turned into bluegrass here. But I'll have Doug Tolentino of Hana playing ukuleles and singing, and Jeff Ahoy of the Steel Guitar Kingdom. He'll be singing and playing steel guitar, and they're the players that recorded with me on my CD called My Aloha.
And so we're going to be getting a lot of that. And explain, you were saying something fascinating, describing the connections between the Hawaii guitar playing and styles and also the bluegrass. Give people, for folks who don't realize the strong connection to the lineage, give a little history background.
Well, I worked for Bill Monroe, the father of bluegrass. I was a bluegrass boy back in the '60s, and he always talked about this other music that he loved, but he said he couldn't play it because it would let his fans down. And so we get into a guessing game, and you know, he would say things like, I would say, well, does it have a mandolin? He said, well, no, but it might have another, one of them little guitars, and it's like, what's that? and would it have a dobro? And he said, no, it would not have a dobro, but it might have one of those slide guitars. And what he was describing was music I'm sure that he heard a lot of as a kid. His parents were real musical people, and I'm sure they had the records that were out in the teens and the 20s as a young Bill was growing up out there in Kentucky. And there was a Hawaiian duo that played on WLS in Cincinnati on the Cincinnati Barn Dance. And Bill, before he played music, was a young dancer on the WLS Barn Dance. But the real connection is in 1915, Johnny Almeida sang a song called Pualilia. And somehow that found its way into Bill Monroe's ears. And years later, he came out with a song called Kentucky Waltz. And it's exactly the same melody. And in fact, the mandolin playing is the same as Johnny Almeida's brilliant playing. So there's just I think the melting pot of string band music is, a great celebration of these interweaving of these roots. And I think knowing about the roots kind of refreshes the whole tree.
Well, it's a lot of education, obviously, and connections that you're illuminating that are there, and some people don't know about. And you sort of
Yeah.
mentioned a little bit of it. You to develop the following you've had over the years. It's taken decades of performing, playing with all kinds of important cats. Some of them you've just mentioned, but if you can, take us back to growing up in Massachusetts, and how your uncle really brought music to you at a young age. And we sort of owe him a big thank you because all these years later, we're here enjoying it.
Yeah, it's funny. This is the full circle story. The first music I heard, I was 4 years old, and my Uncle Jimmy came back from the South Pacific, World War II. He'd been in New Caledonia, but he had disembarked in Honolulu. And he came back, and he had little coconut bras and grass skirts, and he was for all the ladies of the family. He was a great humorist, and he was playing a Martin baritone ukulele. And I started learning songs from him. I mean, he just fascinated me completely. And he had this one song. I want to go back to My Little Grass Shack, of course, in Kealakekua, Hawaii. That's where I first started learning, and the baritone uke was my first instrument. And when I was recording in Honolulu, I was speaking with Doug and Jeff, and I said, I don't know if this is really, I didn't even know if this is a song. I said, but this is what my uncle used to say, hubba hubba ding ding, I mean. And my buddies there just fell out because they said, yeah, that is totally like what the guys in the Navy would be talking about, going to the Hubba Hubba bar down there in Chinatown.
Prostitute bars.
Yeah, and I think it was an expression before the bar even opened. But, it's that international thing, it's sailors and, mingling with musicians and, of course, the lovely ladies of mixing in the cultures. And, I don't know. It seemed like a good song, and it ended up being a song. So, yeah. Hubba hubba ding ding.
Listen to you, and it's really, that was a scene for a lot of people who don't know where you were growing up, was a very powerful scene. It became a big one. Beatniks, the folk scene. It would have the punk scene later. A lot of really important musical scenes came from there. But dialing in on your particular one and yours, you can actually show some illumination to an area. You can really shine some light on something I rarely have heard about, if ever, and that is memories of the Boston club scene from the 1950s. Explain.
Well, I had a little rock and roll band called the Cupids, and we would go out and play shows for the kids, sock hops. And the show would begin at 6 and end at 9, and after that, we'd be driving back, and we heard about this Harvard Square music scene. And it was a juxtaposition of at that time of a bunch of old time music enthusiasts and the jazz musicians who played across town at the jazz workshop would hang out over there in the coffee houses. And as a young kid, you could get into the coffee houses without being 21 years old and hear these guys warming up on their saxophones and conga drums, and they're heading over to play with Miles Davis over across town. It was a very heady and exciting atmosphere to be a young musical ingenue, just ears opening wide to everything. And then there was this place called the Hillbilly Ranch, where the Lilly brothers from Clear Creek, West Virginia, were there for about 25 years. And they had just come to town at the end of World War II to play for mostly the soldiers and sailors who were disembarking from, the Second World War in Europe. The Boston Navy Yard was where they ended up on the northeast seaboard, and so. You had a lot of Southerners there, and a scene, much like the Hubba Hubba, and that was where, you could like sneak into the circus there. You could get in.
Right.
And I started playing there early on, and they didn't seem to mind. There wasn't like a heavy age scene, but that was the one place where there was authentic bluegrass music happening every night of the week, 7 nights a week.
And what a scene, though. You mentioned some of the other stuff. I kind of glossed over it, but the Jazz Workshop, Paul's Mall, all these legendary venues, and the Tea Party, obviously. I mean, it was really say again?
Yeah, that came in the 60s. That was the psychedelic era.
Right. Yeah, I'm kind of, what am I doing? I'm encapsulating many of the different scenes from that general time frame, just because.
Yeah, they all connected, too, yeah.
Right, they all sort of connected. And you were 21 years old when you started. You mentioned his name earlier, the founding father of bluegrass, Bill Monroe. You're just a really, really young man at that time. And for folks who are unaware, explain how Bill factors into the history of bluegrass as such a formidable influence.
Well, he we call him the father of bluegrass music because he spawned so many bands that copied him with the banjo, fiddle, mandolin, guitar, and bass, and the slide guitar too, which is a definite direct Hawaiian influence. But Monroe, as he said to me one time, and you'll appreciate this, he said, "Pete, I've had to keep as much out of bluegrass music as I've put in it." That's an understatement. But he had a huge hit with Blue Moon of Kentucky on his own, and then Elvis recorded it, and it was a hit again. So I remember hearing a reporter ask Bill if Bill didn't think that Elvis had kind of degraded Blue Moon of Kentucky by making it rock and roll. And Bill Monroe didn't miss a beat. He said, "No, sir, them were powerful checks."
Exactly. Right. That was only a huge tribute to it, really, and enabling him to then really use those checks in a big way to help his own life out.
Yeah, well, and other things people don't know about Bill Monroe is that he was the only country music act that had a man of color, D. Ford Bailey, in his band. And D. Ford played harmonica, and D. Ford had the Panamanian blues and the fox chase and all that stuff that the harmonica became famous for. But that D. Ford was one of the originators of all that. And he lived in Nashville, and he played in Bill Monroe's band and traveled with the Bluegrass Boys. So Bill had an interracial band early on, too, as well as stealing from Hawaiian music. He had an interracial band in the segregated South. And another thing, when he had his tent show in the early 50s, the last of his tent shows, which were big in the 40s, he used to carry a full tent and a horse. His horse would have his own, because he'd ride out on stage on the back of his horse. And King Wilkie, it was called King Wilkie.
You're fuzzing out. Get right on the mic again. Tell that story again about him coming out on stage with the horse.
Well, Bill, in his tent show, he had a separate trailer for the horse, King Wilkie, because he would ride out the beginning of the show on the horse. And this, I heard this from a guy in Texas who was a roustabout stagehand for Bill when he was 14 years old. And I said, "Where did you sleep?" Because, when we were with Bill, we never got a hotel. We just sleep in the car or in the bus. And the guy said, "Well, we slept under the truck." I said, "Oh, yeah?" He said, "Yeah, on a tarp." Oh, I said, "Oh, that's good, yeah."
High living.
Yeah, that's high living. But Bill was on such a roll that in the late 40s and early 50s, he had the Everly Brothers opening for him on that show. He carried the Everly Brothers. And another person people don't know about was the young Ray Charles. They carried Ray's piano in a truck, and Ray was one of the opening acts in Bill's tent show. It was a going thing. I think it was just a very commercial time for him, and he drew big crowds. And the joke is, of course, they'd come into a town and they get all the locals to set up the tent, right, the big top. Then they'd challenge him to a baseball game, and then they'd have a wrestling match. And by showtime, all the guys in the local town are like snoozing, and all the girls are all prettied up, and they're coming out, and the Bluegrass Boys are feeling just fine.
What a routine, huh?
Yeah, that's showbiz.
Right? No question about that. That's a funny one.
Yeah, it is.
And that, that's a great insight into this, into that era. And one quick question based on the story you were just telling. And you were in the band when he had Ray Charles opening for him, or this was prior to you?
No. This was when Ray was just starting out.
Okay.
In the early 50s, Ray had decided to, go on his own and make records that weren't gospel records, but were very influenced by gospel. And he traveled with Bill Monroe. And it's not enough time to tell the full story, but
sure, no, I get it.
The Bluegrass Boys came through Las Vegas, and Ray was playing, and as they're driving through town, they mentioned, "Oh, Ray's playing here," and Bill said, "I'd like to see old Ray," and they went to the show, and after the show, Bill was walking down the hallway behind stage, and Ray Charles with his handlers was coming the other direction, And Bill took off his hat and he sang "Blue Moon of Kentucky, Keep on Shining." And Ray ran down the hall and embraced Bill and said,
Wow.
I'd never forget that voice ever.
That's a beautiful story.
Yeah, some of the guys were on the road with him and they told me that story.
That's a good one. That's a real good
Mm-hmm.
one. All right, well, just two more because I don't want to milk you dry before your visit gets underway because we got to keep you in good storytelling shape on the stage. So just two more. One is the ensemble Olden in the Way. Some folks don't know about it. To others, it's this legendary group of folks that included, among others, Grateful Dead's Jerry Garcia, David Grisman. Can you share the story of that group coming together and your role in there?
Yeah, we were living out on the last bit of coast before Hawaii, Stinson Beach, California, and I had come out. I had been on the rock and roll tour with C Train, and I wanted a different thing, a lifestyle change maybe. So I came out here to the left coast, the west coast of California, and we were all living in Stinson Beach, which is north on the coast from San Francisco. And it was, rents were cheap, and it was really nice. It was like Haleiwa in the old days. And Jerry Garcia was living just up the hill. And, it was only a moment in time. I think it was over about a 2-year period that we started playing and played live for a year and a half. And then it was gone because Jerry was moving into such a larger orbit with the Grateful Dead. But we got Vassar Clemens in the band from Alabama, one of the great bluegrass fiddlers who actually recorded with Bill Monroe when he was 16 years old. And it was just a coincidental time period, when we were, we were still coming up and, you couldn't sell bluegrass at all, unless you were on the Grand Ole Opry, and that roster was full. But Jerry started out playing the banjo, and Grisman told me that, hey, Garcia lives up the hill. Why don't we go up? He loves to play bluegrass. So we went up there and we started playing, and we ended up just playing every night. And then after about maybe 6 months, we kind of coalesced and we agreed to go out and play some dates. And we had, in fact, John Hartford played fiddle with us on a show, and Richard Green, and I had Vassar's phone number in my pocket from back when I was with Bill Monroe. This was only 5 years after leaving Bill Monroe. And we were all in our 20s. And I called Vassar, and he said, sure, send me a ticket. And I said, okay. He had gone back to Florida to live. And he flew up to Boston, and we started the tour. But the thing is that bluegrass is mostly outdoors and festivals. And Jerry was allergic to the dust that would inevitably just be all stirred up by people dancing around the stage and everything. And the Grateful Dead, were a huge organization, and Jerry had the major part to keep that thing going. But it was a beautiful time, and the enigmatic and the charismatic Jerry Garcia really graced us with his blessing, and it was good, and it still goes on today. I mean, people, without Jerry, we wouldn't have seen the light of day as easily as we did at that time. And I remember the first show we did with Garcia, he stepped up to take a solo, and he looked down at the banjo for the volume knob, and there weren't none.
That's a great one.
Yeah, I'll say one thing about the bluegrass thing, too. It comes from a man named Jimmy Rogers from back in the 1920s. He only recorded for 8 years, and he was from Mississippi. And the way to put on a show in those days was to call it a Hawaiian show.
Wow.
And he had his own show on the road called Jimmy Rogers Hawaiian Entertainers. And there's a lot of photos of him. And he also had several Hawaiians playing slide guitar, including Laney McIntyre. And so there's an entire history that amongst those that are interested, the information is now all kind of coming to surface. How, in fact, Hawaiians came to New Orleans. And, the beautiful song Tuberose is a Hawaiian song, and it became a jazz standard. So there's a lot of interconnection, And Jimmy Rogers being they call him the father of country music, but really he's more like a blues singer, the blue yodeler. And he chose, and some of his best stuff, I think, is with the Hawaiian accompaniment, ukulele and slide guitar. So it goes back. And then, of course, Bill Monroe jumped Jimmy Rogers' Mule Skinner Blues, and that's what got him on the Grand Ole Opry, Bill Monroe's version of the Mule Skinner Blues. So it's interconnected.
Oh, it all really is, and you do a good way of describing it. As a final note, and I guess we got to mention it because I'm going to play it as we go out. The one of the classic songs that people certainly, I guess it depends on how old you are and the kinds of stuff that you're into. But for me, when I was a little boy, Panama Red was kind of a humorous song, a fun song. Certainly those hippie DJs on WMMR in Philadelphia were the ones I would credit with introducing me to it. And it comes back to you, if you don't mind, as we tip our hat to you for this great little nugget. Share a little bit of its creation.
You know, it's unusual because I wrote that song when it was on the week after Woodstock, which I did not attend, but there was such a vibe going on. It was in the Northeast, and I had left my band that Dave Grisman and I had called Earth Opera, and I chose to play out on the street because I wanted to connect with people. You know, any kind of showbiz enterprise takes you into a very strange realm. And so I started playing out on the streets, and Panama Red came from interacting with people on the streets, and it also came from Panama Red. I mean, the imaginative stimulus, you know. And but yeah, you know, because back in those days it was the jazz musicians, you know, who would say, "Hey, try this, kid," you know, and it was that combination of kind of that fun, that humorous kind of thing, that mysterious personage of the era, Panama Red of the era, you know, sort of that I'm sure we've all known. Haven't you known many, or a few anyway, Panama Reds? I've known a bunch. And they all got names like Fast Eddie, and, you know, and you meet them, and then maybe years later you see them again. But that was of the era, you know. It was I think people's personalities were dissolving into the possibilities of that we were hoping to find. But yeah, that's what Panama Red's about. That, yeah. You
got a good way of describing it. It's Peter Rowan, and he's coming back to town. He's Friday at the Doris Duke over at the Honolulu Museum of Art, Saturday at the MAC, Grammy Award-winning musician and really talented cat, lots of fun to talk to, long history in the islands, and a great way of connecting the islands to the larger history of bluegrass and stringed instruments. Appreciate you being on the show. Hope you had fun today, Peter.
Thanks, Dave. It was really fun. Thanks. I appreciate it. We'll see you, folks. Aloha. It is Peter Rowan talking to you, and you're tuned to my good friend David Lawrence. It's member-supported Hawaii Public Radio, and we really appreciate your support. Mahalo.
You're the man. Giving you a hug, and thank you, Peter. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, man. Thanks for calling.
You're welcome. Have a great day.
And you too. Thanks, Dave. Bye.
Bye.